Hello everybody, I'm Alexey Krabrov, the organizer of SF Scala, and here we're on location at TradeShift, where we have an awesome meetup about microservices. And we have two great talks, and here with us we have Chris Richardson, who is the founder of Eventuate, which is a new startup, basically helping folks build microservices. Welcome, Chris.
Thanks, good to be here.
So tell us a little about the Eventuate.
Yeah, so Eventuate is a platform for writing event-driven microservices. So it supports event sourcing and CQRS. Architecturally, it consists of a server, an event store, and then there are language and framework-specific libraries that you would then use to write your microservices.
For folks who don't know what CQRS is, what does it mean?
Oh, yeah. So CQRS is Command Query Responsibility Segregation. And so the idea there is that you actually split your application into two parts. The command side that handles updates, so HTTP puts, posts, and deletes. And then there's a separate query side that handles, well, queries, in other words, HTTP gets. So it's a separation of responsibilities.
And so event sourcing comes kind of in a long tradition of software engineering. Can you talk about what brought it to life? Why event sourcing became such an important thing? Where is it usually used? What kind of problems it solves?
Oh yeah, so event sourcing, I forget when I first learned about it, it was quite some number of years ago. But it was always a curiosity. And then a few years ago, 2-3, I started building applications with what is now called the microservice architecture. And one recurring problem that you run into is maintaining data consistency across each microservices database. You know, in the old way of building monolithic applications, you had a monolithic database, and so you could just use regular ACID transactions. But in a microservice architecture, each microservice has its own database, and yet you can't use distributed transactions. You know, sort of the CAP theorem and the fact that most modern technologies don't support distributed transactions. So that pushes you in the direction of an event-driven architecture. And event sourcing, for me, proved to be a really, really good way of creating an event-driven architecture. So you're building events into the core of your business logic, which then, as sort of a natural consequence, can be published by those microservices, consumed by another microservice, which can then update its state in response to that event.
Interesting. So you have a lot of experience in software engineering. Can you tell us a little bit about your career and kind of how did you logically arrive at microservices from somewhere in the beginning?
You know, someone asked me, I was at some other conference, in an interview, they asked me, when did I first get into computers? So way back in the beginning, I think when I was a teenager, I discovered a book on computer hardware. I think I was like, I suppose 13 or maybe even 12. And it just grew on me at that point. So yeah, so from a young age, I've just been into software. Spent some number of years building Lisp systems. So that was in the late 80s, early 90s, which it's incredibly sophisticated runtimes, you know, generational garbage collectors and incredibly rich IDEs, and it's taken the mainstream community a very, very long time to catch up to where Lisp and also Smalltalk were 30 plus years ago. What else did I do? Oh, along the way, you know, ultimately I ended up programming in Java, wrote the book Pojos in Action back in 2006, and then I started tinkering with Amazon EC2 back when it was really, really obscure. Just happened to find out about it and was just blown away by the notion that you could, with an API, provision up to 20 servers for 10 cents an hour. Back in 2006, that was like earth-shattering. And now we kind of take it for granted, right?
Right.
so I ended up creating a PaaS called Cloud Foundry that let you, with just 11 clicks of the mouse, deploy a Java web application on EC2 on an Apache Tomcat MySQL stack. And somewhere around, I think it was 2010, I sort of been struggling with building these large, complex, monolithic systems. And I discovered this fantastic book, The Art of Scalability. And in the book, there was this three-dimensional model of scaling. And one of the dimensions was the y-axis, which was functional decomposition, and which basically translates into the microservice architecture. And it was like, oh, wow, we can start building applications that are functionally decomposed instead of building these large complex monoliths. And so I just got super interested in that architectural style, started prototyping things, using what is now the microservice architecture. And I actually first gave a talk about it 4 years ago. April, basically, I think it was like April, beginning of April, end of March. 2012. And I've just got increasingly interested in the microservice architecture since then.
So now obviously it's a very popular topic, and so there are multiple people doing it multiple ways. So we have two talks today, and so Jamie Allen from Lightband is going to unveil, Lightband's own new way to do this called Logom, which we're going to learn about. And so I'm wondering about two things. First of all, is there kind of room for everybody here? Are we kind of the initial exploration phase where a bunch of stuff will be thrown around and then eventually we'll converge on something? Or is it more kind of a service industry where essentially everybody needs to build the services? And, it's kind of consultancy, right? So people will build them and they're inherently separate because they encapsulate pieces, right? And everybody has different pieces, obviously, different sizes. And so you will always need people and they'll do their own way. And kind of where does your startup come in? Like, what do you see as a product here? Is it a service that going to help people, going to teach them, or is it software setup, right, which they can take and implement?
So my company's product comes in two flavors. So first off, the client libraries themselves will just be open source, so just freely available. The actual server will come in two flavors. One will be as a service, so hosted, cloud style, pay-per-use. And then the other form will be a more traditional software download for those people who want to run it in-house.
So is it a single server or is it a server per service? Right, because the idea of decoupling means you want isolation. So does every service, every client have their own data store, for instance, or do you have in a single server? Can you walk us through it?
That's an excellent question. So the effective model would be, logically, it's a single server, but then each service has what is essentially its own schema. So within the server, a service will own a set of aggregate types. They belong to that service, and only that service can access them.
Okay.
So it's sort of logically one, but or physically one, I should say, and then logically it's like partitioned.
Okay. And you need this physical collocation because you want to serialize the events which happen, right? So like in order to do the event sourcing, you need the event log, right?
Yeah. Though in a sense, it's almost like each aggregate is effectively its own mini event log.
Okay.
So it's kind of so it is sort of per service in many regards. But sort of operationally, it's like one endpoint that you it's a host, like in the same sense that you talk to a MySQL instance or a Cassandra cluster, for example. There's just one service that you talk to.
Okay. So I think the topic of your talk is microservices and Scala in Java. right? And so that's kind of the agenda today. We have both things, right? So Lightband is going Java first, and you have a lot of experience with Java. So I wonder, how do you see these two communities interact, right? So Lightband's path is basically Java first, but encapsulating Scala as an architectural implementation, exposing Java APIs. How do you see Java and Scala interact in the world of microservices?
Well, one of the nice things about the microservice architecture is that it naturally lends itself towards polyglot programming.
Mm-hmm.
So services will be written in a mixture of languages.
Mm-hmm.
So even today, right? I mean, like, I suppose in some ways I mostly reside in the Java or the JVM world. So,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, I write in Java, I write in Scala, but then there are other languages. So there's Node.js, for instance, right?
Right.
I mean, that's a great candidate for writing microservices. Likewise, there's a whole community that's writing microservices in Go.
Yes, that's
And
right.
so I think we're moving into a polyglot future.
Where basically will be naturally decoupled through the APIs.
So it's sort of like provided the service implements its API, it doesn't matter what language it's written in.
Mm-hmm.
At least from a pure technical perspective. I mean, organizationally, there's governance issues.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
You might want to think carefully before you allow a developer to go write their service in Haskell,
Mm-hmm.
for instance.
So basically, even you're the main driver behind Eventuate, right? Like for a while you were it's just you and your idea, right? So how do
Yeah.
you plan about growing and competing with Lightband, IBM, all the providers who basically come into the market and say, as a service organization, we have all these microservices, we have all these consultants. How do you see positioning with this offering? How do you see basically, using that in the marketplace? Is there a niche? Are you going to compete with others?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the market for products that support event-driven microservices is going to grow,
Yes.
right? And so, Lightband have ended with Lagom. Hopefully, I said that correctly. And I'm sure there will be others. So. On the other hand, if you actually were to compare the architectures of the two products, they're quite different. They represent different trade-offs,
Mm-hmm.
and so they offer genuine alternatives. Some will, which will appeal more to some people than others. So that's
Mm-hmm.
quite good. And certainly right now, I mean, my startup is small,
Mm-hmm.
doesn't have VC funding. And so,
Which means you're your own man.
yeah, but I'm working with other people. But on the other hand, you could say, well, I look back at the original Cloud Foundry,
Mm-hmm.
right? Similar situation, in fact. And in a short amount of time, we were able to create quite an awesome product that. Some companies then spent millions of dollars trying to replicate the functionality that we had created.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm quite comfortable with the idea of competing with larger, better funded, competitors.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. I think you bring up a very interesting point that different microservices architectures can appeal to different kinds of customers, right? Because obviously, if you do a cloud-hosted version, some people will use it, some people won't, right? But it will, for a lot of people, it will help and it will, eliminate some hassle that otherwise they have to do. But some people will want to do everything on-prem and have full control, right? And so,
Yeah.
So it's kind of interesting. So you probably it means that the market will segment into different kinds of users for different kinds of architectures.
Yeah, and then what I think also I'd say that one nice feature about Eventuate is that architecturally it's not a JVM specific solution either. It's much more able to support a variety of services written in a variety of different languages.
All right. So where can we learn more about Eventuate? Are there things developers can download and play with?
Oh yeah, absolutely. So you can go to eventuate.io. You can sign up to get credentials, API key to the early access version. And there are various sample applications in GitHub.
All right. So it's ready to go.
Yeah, yeah. So really looking for people to kick the tires and give feedback and help shape the direction of the product.
Sounds great. So we're looking forward to your talk and very excited about this new company, and hopefully folks go to GitHub, get Eventuate, and play with this.
Yeah, cool. Thanks.
Thanks, Chris.